Who is the Stitchwraith? You might have heard of this character in passing. Featured as one of the lead characters in Fazbear Frights' overarching epilogue story, and our first excursion really seeing directly inside the mind of a possessed animatronic, he, or they, has quite a story to tell. Initially believed to be the book's version of Innard, they are technically their own thing. An altered endoskeleton holding not one, but two souls inside of it. So, let's dive into the story of the Stitchwraith. Also, quick note here, but as many of the characters in the story I'm about to tell you do not have pictures, I will be using substitutes where I can. So the Stitchwraith's design is official, but everything else is just a visual tool. There once was a man named Phineas Taggart. Taggart was a scientist studying haunted objects and animatronics, assumedly around Utah. Taggart didn't believe in so-called hauntings, and instead believed that toys and bots were brought to life with intense emotions and deemed the strongest emotion to be agony. So yeah, everything about agony technically was concocted by this guy. He also believed he could create a magic aura of good vibes to protect him from the agony. No, I am not kidding. At one point, Taggart gets a hold of two items: a battery that he collects from a dog animatronic, and a mask he took from a doll, and he tethered them to an endoskeleton in an attempt to conduct his agony research. Little did he know, but both objects were blatantly haunted, and in doing this, he trapped two souls in one body. The body, confused upon awakening, accidentally killed Taggart. Apparently his good vibes couldn't deflect the touch of death. No joking there, this robot had the inexplicable ability to kill people just by touch. And while it is frequently associated with agony, it is never explained in great detail. Either way, the robot disguises itself with a trench coat stolen from Taggart and flees into the night. It kills him, it robs him, and then it's gone. This is the Stitchwraith. Though before we can go any further about what it is, we need to take a step back to the two components who make up this amalgam of various parts: Jake and Andrew. Jake and Andrew are night and day of one another. One kindly, compassionate, and naive. The other apathetic, bitter, and distrusting. Though why these children are the way they are comes largely from what brought them into this body. Jake came from a loving family marred by tragedy. His mother passed away when he was young, and he was largely raised by his loving father and later by his caretaker, a woman named Margie, who also adored him. Unfortunately, Jake's life was cut drastically short by an aggressive illness. They do clarify that it is an inoperable brain tumor. It confines him largely to bed and has taken away many of the things he enjoyed in his life. Despite this, Jake's father and Margie do their best to keep Jake happy, believing that it's the one way for him to recover, or at least the one way to keep him fighting. Unfortunately, again, Jake's father was a soldier who had to leave for long periods of time, but that was okay, because Jake had a special friend, a doll who would talk to him, Simon. And before you think the worst, Simon held a radio inside of him, and through that, Jake's father spoke to him, asking him about his day. They even came up with this sort of game where Jake would use Simon to come up with stories for what the real Jake did. Then, after he went to sleep, Margie would alter the doll, putting pizza sauce on its face, chocolate stains on it, etc., to go along with the story. As an aside, Margie is in love with Jake's father and considered Jake her own son, so again, nothing malicious. But there comes a time when Jake's father passes away while overseas. Margie is unable to tell Jake the truth and instead puts Simon away, and Jake's health quickly deteriorates. Though there were plenty of hints that Jake's health was declining regardless. Soon after, Jake passes away as well, leaving Margie alone in the house. But Jake was still there. Jake's soul attached to the body of Simon. While the details are unclear, it seems that Simon, possessed by Jake, might have escaped the house on his own, possibly confused like he was when initially waking up in the Stitchwraith. Taggart got a hold of the doll, removes its face, and uses it for his endoskeleton project. Because they're not hauntings, they're just residual feelings, so there's nothing wrong with it. But in hindsight, you can see where Jake gets his personality. While faced with a lot of tragedy, he was surrounded by love, even in his final moments. Andrew was not so fortunate. We don't know too much about Andrew's early life, though Jake at one point mentions that Andrew reminds him of a kid who used to act up in class before he had to quit school. It's possible that was Andrew, but I don't recall it being confirmed. Either way, Andrew's life was unexpectedly shattered when he was murdered by William Afton. Unlike the other children he murdered, who went on to possess animatronics, somehow Andrew attached himself directly to William and lingered with him, bitter and resentful. At some point, Afton caught on fire, as he typically does, and wound up wasting away in a hospital. Yet he didn't die, because Andrew kept him alive to torment him. He tormented the nurses trying to actively put Afton down too. He appeared as a boy with curly black hair, a menacing grin, wearing a gator mask. This seems to be a reference more to the gator mask-wearing child in Fnaf 3's Happiest Day minigame than like Monty Gator. But Security Breach was being created and was released alongside these books, so it's unclear if there was a connection there or not. A kindly priest looking to help Afton agrees to take him to the Fazbear warehouse. Once there, Afton pretty much explodes, and his ooze, seemingly controlled by Andrew, but not quite, ends up spreading to all the objects present, making Andrew the source of agony for the haunted animatronics and items throughout the Fazbear Frights series. Until the, reveal later, but I digress. One of these objects is a dog animatronic named Fetch. Now, I won't go too deeply into his story, but basically he befriends a kid, harasses him, bites some guy's finger off, kills a chick, and then somehow ends up with Taggart, who yanks out his battery and sticks it in the Stitchwraith. It is unclear why Andrew was so attached to Fetch in particular, but throwing ideas out there, maybe he was the most functional animatronic in the warehouse. Again, unclear. Andrew's anger and distrust makes a lot more sense in the context that he was murdered and then suffered alone for so long, especially since we don't have the details of how he died. If Jake's assumption is true and Andrew is the kid who acted up, it is possible he didn't have a great home life, as that can lead to children acting out. It's unclear, though I should state my opinions right now, and that's that Andrew's behavior, his indifference and frustration, his clinginess to Jake, it all points to a child who is hurting. Antagonistic, yes, but not a villain, not a monster. Though, with these two combined in one form with a touch of a swift death, you can see the hijinks that will surely ensue. So now we're up to speed, let's continue with the Stitchwraith. Jake and Andrew meet while in the Stitchwraith, both constantly fighting for control and, in fact, unable to control the entire body as there's two of them. Despite this and Andrew's abrasiveness, the two form some form of a friendship. Jake feels sorry for Andrew and tries to keep the peace, and tries to convince him to take the better road, while Andrew is initially reluctant but also quickly latches on to Jake's companionship, even panicking when he thinks he might lose him. There's a few scenes of note throughout Jake and Andrew's time together. Jake finds out about Andrew accidentally spreading his pain into many objects and goes on a crusade to gather them all up. Andrew is less convinced and totally unwilling to help, but Jake's able to memory check him and figure it out, and soon enough Andrew is just along for the ride. The most important of their scenes together involves a moment where they're in the warehouse and Jake is tending to some flowers, and Andrew asks him basically about them and why he's doing what he's doing. While Jake is talking, he has a vivid memory about him and his father at a baseball game, one he gets so engrossed in that he begins to actually leave the Stitchwraith body and move on, only to come back reluctantly when Andrew pleads for him in a panic. When Andrew questions him after the event, Jake just continues to silently tend to the flowers. This is actually a very important scene because this is the point where the two have the most conflict. Now, you would think the fact that Jake asked Andrew to help him and Andrew said no would be the most conflict, but this moment here is when Jake actively gets conflict with Andrew. Jake wants to move on, but now he feels obligated to stay. That can grow into some form of resentment, and I'll go into that later because it's not followed through on, but this is a very important moment, so keep that in mind. It is also notable and should be mentioned that Jake starts wondering if this power they have, which instantly kills people by having them bleed black out of their eyes, is brought on by something other than Andrew, if there is something else sharing this body with them. Now, the Stitchwraith has been seen by a few people and is thus considered a local legend, or, well, the local cryptid. The case winds up getting passed on to Detective Larson, a local detective with family drama that isn't important, so I won't be talking about it or really him. Save that in the epilogues, we also follow him as he investigates the Stitchwraith, doing interviews with Margie and a homeless man named Grim who spotted the robot raiding the dump. This comes to a head when Larson ends up catching up to the Stitchwraith. Jake and Andrew panic and fight for control over the body, unsure of what to do. Andrew wanting to take out the threat, while Jake doesn't want anyone else to get hurt. Eventually, Jake gets control of the body and throws them into a trash compactor, which releases the monstrous third who has been in the body with them. See, the truth is that what was going on wasn't Andrew's agony infecting all their objects, at least not entirely. It was actually Afton. He is the true evil, and he possesses all of the items Jake tried to destroy and becomes a big rabbit-shaped amalgamation. He is the real big bad, and as Jake is released, he realizes that Andrew is being dragged down into Afton. So Jake selflessly pushes Andrew free and takes his place. Jake has made the ultimate sacrifice for Andrew. Afton has been released. The Stitchwraith is seemingly broken beyond repair, and now they are in their final hour. Everything has been leading to this moment. And with that change in music, you know I'm about to get into the stupid part of the story. I bet you're wondering, naughty name, how can setup this golden get ruined? Well, it's all part of a handy-dandy 3-step plan which totally tears down all of the setup and decides to stop telling the story it was telling. Ready? Here we go. First, you get rid of Andrew. In that moment where Jake sacrificed himself for Andrew, the moment that, for all intents and purposes, should be the critical moment where a jerkish character who's not a villain, as he is now revealed to not be, hits a turning point. It's the big moment that takes the next step in his character arc. Now he knows Jake is a true friend. Now he has to make up for his ways. Except Andrew's like gone. He doesn't possess something else and come back later in the story. He isn't revealed to be someone else. His whole arc doesn't have any sort of payoff. This child who started everything just gets booted by the plot. He doesn't even appear at the end. This is a major character. This is half of a major character who supposedly helped jumpstart everything, who is dropped out of nowhere. And yes, the story going forward does feel the effects from this decision, because instead of the back and forth between Jake and Andrew, it's just Jake. And on his own, Jake comes off as a real martyr and super naive. Something that, if you think about it, could have played excellently with Andrew. Andrew has been antagonistic and has been distrusting, angry, and sour this whole time. Now having him be the sound judgment and having Jake not believe him because of his previous behavior, then having Andrew stepping up to help Jake, both redeeming himself and fixing their friendship, would have been great. But no. See, Andrew gets kicked out and Jake kind of becomes this weird side piece onto a story that only kind of involves him. Not really. You can tell the story really wants to be about someone else. Step 2. You've been building up Afton this whole time. Now he's an amalgam. He's here, huge and nightmarish. Throw the 2-second cameo puppet at him and kill him off immediately and with no payoff. I'm not kidding. The puppet is a MacGuffin that Larson finds and carries around in a bag before unleashing and immediately stopping Afton. But who cares? We didn't really want him back. We just had to have him back because, I don't know. Security breach is going to have Burn Trap and the Blob, so we just mixed those two together and saved on story space. Step 3. Eleanor. I will try to withhold myself here, but yeah, I introduce a new villain, have her take responsibility for stuff originally said to be Andrew, give her no chemistry with any of the characters, and that's hero versus villain chemistry. No logical motive. Have her trick Jake in a really obvious way to make him seem stupid. Have her trick everyone else. And then you can kill her off anticlimactically and spend the last epilogue just being like, by the way, this character had this ending, and this one had that one, and Jake did this and that. Let me go through this in a little more detail, though know that I don't entirely want to. So, after Afton's immediate destruction, Jake goes back into the Stitchwraith, and Eleanor literally snakes over and soaks up all the agony and bad vibes from him. He helps Larson, who is injured, and then goes off on his way. The rest of the story doesn't really know what to do with Jake or the Stitchwraith, so he just kind of wanders around, doing random acts of good. So Jake's memory powers have increased tenfold. He can now touch someone, and instead of killing them, he gets their whole backstory laid out for them. It's very convenient, but isn't really used for anything of significance. He comes up on some drug dealers attacking a young woman who's a drug addict. Jake takes out one of the drug dealers and then burns "Just Say No" into his forehead. Golly gee, that seems pretty aggressive. That seems a lot like something Andrew would do. In fact, that seems like something Andrew would do because Jake told him not to kill, or something Jake might do at the encouragement of Andrew and then feel really guilty about afterwards. I can't even express how much colorful story potential we lost with Andrew. Everything's very matter-of-fact and boring in these epilogues. Jake's existence, and the fact that he no longer has anyone to play off of, makes these segments very skim-worthy. I mean, I won't act like the interactions between Jake and Andrew were the best thing ever. Their introduction portion feels like a couple of robots talking at times, but there is something there, and it's more apparent when he's alone. It's the same Stitchwraith, just half of it is gone. But Eleanor has been following Jake and replaces the drug-addled woman, but doesn't kill her, as she's found later, and disguises herself badly. Like, the book makes it clear that Jake finds it weird that she's suddenly cleaned up and looks slightly different, but he doesn't question it at all. Eleanor says her name is Rennell and wants him to escort her to Dr. Talbert, a guy who worked with Dr. Taggart and studied the same thing. In fact, you might just say that Dr. Talbert might have just been created because the story needed Dr. Taggart back, but he was already dead. See, she needs Jake because... I don't know. I don't know. She uses him to act like she was attacked or something. But Eleanor can make herself look like anything in an instant, so she doesn't really need him. He doesn't realize the ruse until he gets to the house and realizes that she doesn't look like Rennell. My favorite part of this setup is that apparently Eleanor knows who Rennell is, and yet doesn't know what she looks like. She knows Dr. Talbert, she wears Rennell's necklace, she knows this much, but she doesn't know what she looks like. And no, I double-checked, and against what is commonly assumed, as it might have made, I guess, some form of sense, Rennell isn't the drug addict woman, she's just some other character. So, Jake gets shot and Talbert powers up Eleanor, and then gets knocked out, and then Larson comes in and fights Eleanor, and then Jake seals her in a bad memory. The end. Well, no, the story keeps going on for one last epilogue. Jake goes around doing random acts of good, such as rescuing the drug addict, helping Talbert get reconnected with his daughter, I think, and eventually finds his way to the time-traveling ball pit, don't ask, where he finds the souls of all the children, even the ones who weren't killed there. He powers down the failing Stitchwraith and becomes part of the haunted ball pit, giving the souls trapped their good memories. A happy ending. Except he will never see his father again. No drifting into memories and moving on, he's trapped there playing God to a bunch of kids trapped forever in a sea of plastic balls, until omnipresent Fazbear Entertainment pulls a Taggart, harvests them, and dumps them into their next attraction for no obvious benefit, in which case they will likely haunt anything that gets into them. Rest in peace, Sunman. None of those kids, including Jake, can move on. Except Andrew, because he wasn't important to the story anymore. But speaking of Andrew, instead of telling you my problems, why don't I offer you a solution to at least some of these problems? So imagine this. After Afton's defeat, Jake is almost dragged into the lake when something pulls and holds him into the Stitchwraith, even when and if Eleanor grinches her way through. It is Andrew. He has saved Jake like Jake saved him. Why is Andrew back in the Stitchwraith? First thing he could grab onto. Andrew seems a little out of it, and when Jake goes to help Larson, he doesn't stop him. Indeed, Andrew is on the cusp of a change of heart. While they are both trapped in the body still, unsure where to go, he is much more open to Jake now that Jake has saved his life. And because he now knows that Afton had been a parasite in them the entire time, and it's causing him to second-guess himself. Jake suggests that they go around helping people, and maybe they'll find a way to free themselves. This time, Andrew agrees to the idea. When the memory powers come out, Jake and Andrew actually discuss things in them, like seeing the homeless guy's past and discussing how and if they can help. Maybe Andrew is the one who goes after the drug dealers, and when he gets one pinned, Jake begs him not to kill him. So Andrew shows restraint and burning him instead and runs him off. Jake is somewhat torn, but they find a middle ground in the fact that they just ran off some bad guys. Andrew notices that their rescued girl looks different from last night and doesn't trust her, but Jake thinks he's just being Andrew, so he isn't picking up the red flags Andrew does until he can't ignore them anymore. There's a less silly fight in the house, but I definitely think it's worth having a one-on-one between Andrew and Eleanor, the two pseudo-villains of the series. Now Andrew, the source of the agony Eleanor feeds on, would be perfect for poisoning and corrupting her, while Jake and him seal her away. Still kind of goofy, but now there's a better payoff. They end up in the ball pit and hop inside. They realize there's a bunch of kids already in there, but they realize as well, by giving the kids good memories, they can help them move on. One by one, they help the children leave the ball pit, giving them pleasant memories to release their souls, until the Stitchwraith shuts down and it's just the two of them in the ball pit. The two friends realize it's time to rest. Jake offers Andrew to come with him, and Andrew takes his hand. Finally, he has someone who's there for him, and Jake can now finally be at peace. And they suddenly wake up. They're confused. Something's wrong. Something fell into the ball pit and woke them up. Jake and Andrew check in on each other. It's still them. They're still here. But something has changed. Their body has awoken again, and they crawl to the top of the ball pit and climb out. But something has happened. The broken down pizzeria around them is gone, and it's been replaced with something new and rebuilt. Were they moved? Was it moved? They are confused. Andrew is becoming agitated and scared. Jake tries to calm him down. They get to their feet and shuffle along until they realize that this isn't their body. Something that becomes all too clear when they finally find a reflective surface and find that there's a grinning face with milky white eyes staring back. It's not over. Okay, maybe I'm overdoing it with the sun and moon epilogue, but the point before that was sound. Jake and Andrew having full arcs, Jake being good but needing a protector, Andrew being flawed but getting the help he needs, even Jake and Andrew working checks and balances together to help move souls on one by one. That they weren't trapped in the ball pit forever, but just there until they can convince them to move on. Two young boys turned protectors. It could have been great. Why did you get rid of him? You didn't have to do that. Why? Well, personally, I believe it was because the epilogues were suddenly expanded and they decided they couldn't do 5 books of Afton, so instead they would switch to Eleanor. Then, seeing Andrew as an antagonistic force they no longer needed, they canned him because it's not like he was vitally important for Jake's story and that the other lead, Larson, was kind of a well-meaning block of wood. But I digress. So that's the story of the Stitchwraith. That's what it is, that's what they did, and that's how it ends. And here's what I leave you with. Sometimes heroes can be more than good characters, and sometimes taking out flawed characters as to not, I guess, detract from the changing of the guards with the villains, can be taking away opportunities that you can use. And when plans change, there's ways to roll with the punches without throwing out what you can. By which I mean, if you decide to tell a story about 2 boys in a trench coat, tell their story. Don't just suddenly decide to drop one and then not the other, because the lack of Andrew can be felt, and Jake's presence isn't required, and all it does is fail to carry through with the themes established early on. And on that note, thank you for watching. I've got to go yell at some clouds.